Ethan Crawford had never noticed her before. Not really. She was just part of the scenery at Crawford Technologies, like the marble floors or the expensive art hanging in the lobby. Every day around noon, while he sat in the executive dining room surrounded by vice presidents discussing quarterly earnings, she would slip into the storage room on the third floor with a brown paper bag. He only discovered this because he'd gotten lost looking for a conference room his father had insisted he find on his own. That's when he saw her. An older woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, sitting on an upturned bucket, eating a sandwich in the dimly lit space among cleaning supplies and boxes. The fluorescent light flickered above her head, and she seemed perfectly content in that moment, eyes closed as she chewed slowly. Something about the scene stopped Ethan cold in the hallway. He was 26 years old and had been groomed his entire life to take over his father's empire. Yet he'd never really seen the people who kept it running. The next day, he found himself walking past that storage room again. She was there, same bucket, same paper bag. This time she was looking at a small photograph she'd pulled from her pocket. Ethan watched her smile at it with such tenderness that he felt like he was intruding on something sacred. He cleared his throat and knocked lightly on the open door. She looked up, startled, quickly tucking the photo away. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. I'm Ethan." She stood up quickly, smoothing her uniform. "I know who you are, Mr. Crawford. Is there something you need?" He felt suddenly foolish. "No, I just noticed you eat here alone. There's a break room on every floor. The second floor one has windows and tables." She smiled politely, but there was something guarded in her expression. "I prefer it here. It's quiet." Over the next week, Ethan couldn't shake his curiosity. He started paying attention to things he'd never noticed before. The building employed dozens of cleaning staff, maintenance workers, and service personnel. Most of them ate together in the basement cafeteria or the designated break rooms. But this woman, whose name he learned from her badge was Rose Bennett, always disappeared to that storage room alone. Finally, his curiosity overwhelmed his better judgment. He showed up at the storage room with his own lunch one Thursday afternoon. Rose looked up in surprise as he settled himself on a box across from her bucket. "Do you mind if I join you? The executive dining room is serving something that claims to be fusion cuisine, and honestly, I'd rather have whatever you're having." Rose's eyes widened. "Mr. Crawford, you really don't have to do this. I'm fine." "I know you're fine, but I'd like to know why you choose this space over the break rooms." "If you'll tell me." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. She unwrapped her sandwich, took a bite, and began to speak. Her voice was soft but steady. "I eat alone because it's easier than answering questions." Then, seeing the pity in people's eyes when they remember who I am, or rather who I was, Ethan leaned forward, listening. Rose continued, looking down at her hands. 5 years ago, my husband and I owned a small chain of bakeries, 3 locations. We'd built them from nothing over 25 years. We had a beautiful home, sent both our kids to college. We weren't wealthy like your family, but we were comfortable. We were happy. She paused, her voice catching slightly. Then my husband got sick. Cancer, the aggressive kind. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. Not for the treatments he needed. Not for the experimental trials that gave us hope. We sold the bakeries first. Then the house. Then everything we'd built. I would have sold my soul if I thought it would save him. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." Rose smiled sadly. "He died anyway. 3 years ago last month, and I was left with nothing but debt and memories. My children tried to help, but they have their own families now, their own struggles. I didn't want to be a burden. So I moved into a small apartment, took this job, and started over at 62 years old. But that doesn't explain why you eat alone," Ethan said gently. Rose met his eyes. "Because when people here found out my story, they treated me differently. Some pitied me, some avoided me, like poverty and tragedy might be contagious. Others wanted to help in ways that felt like charity, and I still have too much pride for that. So I found this little space where I can eat my lunch, look at pictures of my husband, and remember who I was before everything fell apart. Here, I don't have to be poor Rose. I can just be Rose." Ethan sat in silence, feeling something crack open inside his chest. He'd spent his entire life surrounded by wealth and privilege, never understanding what it meant to lose everything, never truly seeing the people who existed in the shadows of his family's success. He thought about his own complaints, his frustration with his father's expectations, his resentment at being pushed into a role he wasn't sure he wanted. It all felt so trivial now. "Can I ask you something?" Rose said suddenly. "Why does the son of a billionaire care where an old janitor eats her lunch?" Ethan considered the question. "Because I've been walking through life blind." Because I just realized I've never really looked at the people around me. Because your story matters, and I should have noticed you long before now. Something shifted in Rose's expression, a softness replacing the guardedness. You're different than I expected. Your father has a reputation for being ruthless. He is, Ethan admitted. But maybe I don't have to be. That conversation changed something fundamental in Ethan. He started showing up to the storage room regularly, and Rose began to open up. She told him about her husband's terrible jokes, about the early morning hours they'd spent baking together, about the pride they'd felt watching their children graduate college. She told him about the loneliness that followed loss, about rebuilding at an age when most people were thinking about retirement. In return, Ethan found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. His fear that he'd never be good enough to run the company. His sense that he was living someone else's dream instead of his own. His loneliness despite being surrounded by people constantly. 2 months into their lunch meetings, Ethan walked into his father's office with a proposal. He'd spent weeks researching, planning, and building a business case. He wanted Crawford Technologies to start an employee assistance program, a real one, with resources for staff facing financial hardship, medical crisis, or personal emergencies. He wanted to create scholarship funds for employees' children. He wanted to ensure that no one working for their company would ever have to choose between saving a loved one and keeping a roof over their head. His father listened with his usual stern expression. When Ethan finished, there was a long silence. Then Richard Crawford leaned back in his chair and did something Ethan had rarely seen. He smiled with genuine pride. Your mother would have loved this. Before she passed, she always said our wealth was meaningless if we didn't use it to lift others up. I got so focused on building the business that I forgot that lesson. But you remembered, or rather, someone taught you. Ethan nodded. Her name is Rose Bennett. She works in facilities management. I know Rose, his father said quietly. I didn't know her story, but I know she's one of the hardest workers we have. Let's do this properly, son. And let's make sure she knows she helped create something important. 6 months later, Crawford Technologies launched the Crawford Family Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. The program provided emergency assistance, healthcare support, education funding, and crisis intervention for all employees and their families. Rose was hired as a consultant, helping to design programs that addressed real needs because she understood struggle in ways the executives never could. But Ethan's gesture to Rose went deeper than that. Privately, he'd worked with his father to settle her remaining debts and set up a trust that would ensure her financial security. When they told her, Rose cried for the first time since Ethan had known her. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. The weight she'd been carrying alone for years was finally lifted. The storage room on the 3rd floor became something different after that. Rose still ate there sometimes, but now she was often joined by Ethan and increasingly by other employees who'd heard about the quiet place where the boss's son and the janitor had started a revolution in how their company treated its people. It became a symbol of something Crawford Technologies had been missing, a reminder that every person matters, that every story deserves to be heard, and that true success is measured not in profits but in the lives we touch. 3 years later, Ethan stood at a podium in front of 1,000 employees, announcing his new role as CEO. His father had finally retired, confident that the company was in good hands. In the front row sat Rose Bennett, now the foundation director, her eyes bright with pride. As Ethan looked out at the crowd, he thought about that first day he'd seen her eating alone in a storage room. How one simple question had changed both their lives. How paying attention to someone others overlooked had taught him what leadership really meant. After the ceremony, Rose approached him with a familiar brown paper bag. I thought we could have lunch in our old spot. For old times' sake. Ethan smiled. I'd like that. As they sat together on boxes in that storage room, Rose pulled out the photograph she'd been looking at that first day. She handed it to Ethan. It showed a younger Rose and a man with kind eyes standing in front of a bakery. He had his arm around her waist, and they were both covered in flour, laughing at something beyond the frame. That's him. That's my Thomas. I think he'd be proud of what we built here. Not just the foundation, but the reminder that kindness matters, that seeing each other matters. Ethan handed the photo back carefully. I know I'm proud and grateful. You taught me how to lead with heart. Rose patted his hand. You were always capable of it. You just needed someone to help you see it. The truth is, we all walk past people every day without really seeing them. We miss stories that could change us, connections that could transform us, opportunities to make a difference simply by paying attention. One question, One moment of genuine interest, one decision to look beyond our own world can ripple outward in ways we never imagined. If this story touched your heart, do something that matters. Look around. Notice the people you usually overlook. Ask questions. Listen to the answers. You might discover that the person you thought was invisible holds the key to becoming who you're meant to be. Like this video if you believe in the power of human connection. Subscribe to Kindify Stories for more reminders that compassion changes everything. And share this with someone who needs to remember that every person has a story worth hearing, and every act of kindness creates waves that can change the world. Because in the end, we're all just people trying to matter to someone. Let's make sure we see each other,